The world tilted on its axis the moment I saw the suitcases by the door, larger than my entire body. Their laughter echoed from the kitchen, a sound that used to be my safe harbor, now a mocking wave crashing over my head. They said it was a small mistake, a misunderstanding, but the cold knot in my stomach told me this was no accident. This was abandonment, painted with a thin veneer of parental negligence, a vacation taken at the expense of my childhood. If you've ever felt betrayed by the people who should have loved you the most, subscribe now to hear more stories about family secrets and ultimate revenge. My 11th birthday had come and gone like a ghost, barely a whisper in the cacophony of their travel plans. Europe. A month. While I was a loose end, a forgotten chore. $20. That's what my life was worth, apparently, enough for a few bags of chips and a desperate prayer that the kindly old lady at the corner store wouldn't notice how often I was there, buying the cheapest sustenance I could find. They left a note, stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a smiling sun, "Be good. We'll miss you." The irony was a bitter pill I swallowed with every stale cracker. The silence of the house became a living thing, pressing in on me, amplifying every creak and groan. The shadows stretched long and distorted, mirroring the growing fear that gnawed at my insides. I learned to ration, to stretch pennies until they screamed, to become invisible, a ghost in my own home. I was Luna, the girl who disappeared, the daughter who didn't matter. The first few days were a blur of hunger and loneliness. I tried calling their cell phones, but the calls went straight to voicemail, a robotic voice chirping about international roaming charges and unavailable networks. I imagined them sipping wine in a Parisian cafe, oblivious to the gnawing emptiness that consumed me. My older sister, Sarah, was supposed to check in, but her visits were sporadic, fleeting glimpses of concern before she disappeared back into her own world of teenage angst and secret rendezvous. She brought pizza once, a welcome feast in my desolate landscape, but the guilt in her eyes was a sharp reminder that she was complicit, a silent observer in my abandonment. I started documenting everything. The dates, the times, the dwindling stack of bills in my father's desk drawer where I found the $20. Each entry was a brick in the wall I was building, a testament to their negligence, a promise of future reckoning. I kept a detailed log of everything Sarah brought, including the day she mentioned that Mom had mentioned she knew I liked a certain type of candy. A candy that I never saw. It was a constant reminder that even my sister knew I was being deprived. The hunger became a constant companion, a dull ache in my stomach that gnawed at my resolve. I started skipping meals, trying to stretch the remaining dollars as far as possible. I'd spend hours in the library, escaping into the pages of books, dreaming of faraway lands where children were cherished, not discarded. I started losing weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. I saw my reflection in the darkened television screen one night, and I barely recognized myself. The bright-eyed girl I once was had been replaced by a hollow-cheeked stranger, haunted by shadows and fueled by a simmering rage. The person I trusted most was one of them. Sarah knew. She knew the extent of their neglect, the paltry sum they had left me with, the emptiness of the refrigerator. She saw me fading away, a wilting flower deprived of sunlight, and she did nothing. She brought pizza, yes, but she also brought excuses, justifications for their absence, assurances that they loved me, that they would make it up to me. But her words were hollow, empty promises that crumbled to dust in the face of my reality. Her betrayal cut deeper than their abandonment, a wound inflicted by the one person I thought would always be there for me. The nights were the worst. Sleep became a battlefield where nightmares stalked me, replaying the scene of their departure, twisting their smiles into grotesque masks. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the silence of the house amplifying the fear that clawed at my throat. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, a small, serrated blade I'd found in the kitchen drawer, a pathetic talisman against the monsters that lurked in the shadows, both real and imagined. I tried to convince myself that they would come back early, that they would realize their mistake and return to find me waiting, a prodigal daughter ready to forgive. But each passing day chipped away at my hope, leaving behind a residue of bitterness and resentment. I began to resent their laughter, their carefree existence, the privilege that allowed them to abandon me without a second thought. My schoolwork suffered. I couldn't concentrate, my mind consumed by calculations of survival, by the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. My grades plummeted, a reflection of the freefall my life had become. Teachers noticed, of course, their concerned glances and whispered conversations following me down the hallways. But their attempts to reach out were clumsy, ineffective, their words of encouragement hollow and meaningless. How could they understand the depth of my despair, the suffocating weight of my abandonment? They offered me food, which was a start, but the shame of accepting their pity burned in my throat. I started avoiding them, retreating further into my shell, becoming the invisible girl they already perceived me to be. I tried to find a job, desperate to earn enough money to sustain myself, to reclaim some semblance of control over my life. But at 11 years old, my options were limited. I offered to mow lawns, to walk dogs, to do anything for a few dollars. But most people dismissed me, their faces etched with pity or suspicion. A few offered me small tasks, weeding gardens or sweeping porches, but the pay was meager, barely enough to buy a loaf of bread. One man, his eyes too eager, his smile too wide, offered me a special job, something he said I wouldn't have to tell my parents about. The way he looked at me sent a shiver of fear down my spine, a primal warning that I couldn't ignore. I ran, my heart pounding, the image of his leering face seared into my memory. That was the day I stopped asking for help. That was the day I realized that I was truly alone. The bills piled up on the kitchen counter, mocking reminders of their absence, of their financial irresponsibility. The electricity bill was the most pressing, the threat of darkness looming over me like a specter. I tried to conserve energy, turning off lights, unplugging appliances, but it wasn't enough. The final notice arrived, a stark white envelope with a bold red warning, disconnection notice. My stomach churned. The thought of being plunged into darkness, of losing the small comfort of electricity, terrified me. I considered selling my belongings, my old toys, my clothes, anything to raise enough money to pay the bill. But the thought of parting with the few remaining vestiges of my childhood was unbearable. I was backed into a corner, desperate and alone, with no one to turn to. I went through my sister's old things, and found an old phone. She wouldn't miss it. I knew I could sell it for something. One night, Sarah came over. Pizza night. Again. This time, I was ready. I had been stewing in resentment and anger. They said they'd call, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Have you spoken to them? Sarah avoided my gaze, busying herself with slicing the pizza. They're having a great time, she said, her voice too cheerful, too forced. They send their love. I grabbed her arm, my fingers digging into her flesh. Tell me the truth, I demanded, my voice rising. Are they even thinking about me? Her eyes welled up with tears. Of course, they are, she said, her voice cracking. They're just distracted. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Distracted? They left me here to starve, Sarah. They abandoned me. She flinched, pulling away from my grasp. Don't say that, she said, her voice pleading. They didn't mean to what? I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Didn't mean to forget about me? Didn't mean to leave me with $20 and a pat on the head? Didn't mean to ruin my life? She started to cry, her shoulders shaking. "I can't do this," she sobbed. "I can't listen to this." She grabbed her purse and ran out the door, leaving the pizza untouched on the counter, a cold and greasy monument to her betrayal. I watched her go, my heart filled with a cold, hard resolve. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. Every creak of the house was a reminder of my situation. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I was going to make them pay. The day the electricity was cut off, the world shrunk to the beam of a cheap flashlight. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating blanket that snuffed out the last embers of hope. The refrigerator, once a symbol of their casual disregard, was now a tomb, its contents slowly decaying, poisoning the air with the stench of neglect. I huddled in my bed, the knife clutched in my hand, listening to the rats skittering in the walls, their tiny claws scratching at my sanity. The silence was broken only by the occasional passing car, its headlights momentarily illuminating my prison, then fading away, leaving me in deeper darkness than before. I ate the last of the crackers, chewing slowly, savoring each bite, trying to ignore the gnawing emptiness in my stomach. I was alone, abandoned, and forgotten. I was nothing. That night, I dreamed of fire. I woke up shivering, my teeth chattering, the flashlight battery flickering its last. The house was cold, damp, and filled with the musty odor of decay. I stumbled to the window, drawn by the faint glimmer of dawn. The sky was a bruised purple, mirroring the ache in my heart. I looked out at the world, at the houses across the street, their windows glowing with warmth and light, filled with families who loved and cared for each other. A wave of resentment washed over me, a bitter, corrosive tide that threatened to drown me. I wanted to scream, to shatter the silence with my rage, but I couldn't. My voice was gone, lost somewhere in the darkness. I turned away from the window, my body numb, my spirit broken. I walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. The face that stared back at me was gaunt, hollow-eyed, and unrecognizable. I was a ghost, a shadow of my former self. I was nothing. But even nothing can be dangerous when it has nothing to lose. The spark ignited unexpectedly, a flicker of defiance in the ashes of my despair. I was staring at myself in the mirror, at the pathetic creature I had become, when I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible shift in my eyes. A hardening of my gaze. A flicker of something else. It wasn't hope. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something far more dangerous. It was resolve. A cold, unwavering determination to survive. To fight back. To make them pay. The electricity was gone, but the darkness couldn't touch the fire that was now burning inside me. They had taken everything from me. My childhood. My innocence. My sense of security. But they hadn't taken my mind. They hadn't taken my will. And they hadn't taken my memory. I remembered every word, every action, every betrayal. And I was going to use it all. I started small. The phone Sarah said I couldn't have was now my only tool. I sold it to a pawn shop for a fraction of its worth, but it was enough to buy a few cans of soup, a loaf of bread, and a new flashlight battery. I spent hours at the library, not reading fairy tales, but researching. Laws about abandonment. Parental negligence. The rights of minors. I learned about social services, about legal recourse, about the power of documentation. I devoured every article, every statute, every case study I could find, arming myself with knowledge, preparing for battle. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I stopped waiting for them to come back. I stopped being a victim. I became a strategist. I started observing. Listening. Recording. Every conversation, every phone call, every interaction. Sarah, thinking she was being helpful, would occasionally drop hints about their trip, about their spending habits, about their growing debt. I filed it all away, each piece of information a weapon in my arsenal. I cleaned the house. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. The filth and decay were a constant reminder of my helplessness, of their neglect. I scrubbed the floors, wiped down the counters, and emptied the refrigerator, purging the stench of rot. As I cleaned, I thought. I planned. I plotted. I was meticulous, methodical, and utterly ruthless. The girl who had been abandoned was gone. In her place was someone new. Someone cold. Someone calculating. Someone who was going to make them regret ever crossing her path. I found their travel documents hidden in a drawer. Passports, itineraries, credit card statements. A treasure trove of information. I photographed everything, meticulously documenting their extravagance, their recklessness, their blatant disregard for my well-being. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. They believed that their wealth, their privilege, their social standing would protect them from any consequences. They thought I was a child, helpless and powerless. They were wrong. I was a survivor. And I was about to turn their world upside down. I imagined their faces when they returned, expecting to find me broken and defeated. I imagined the shock, the horror, the realization that they had underestimated me. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a cold, predatory smile. The kind of smile that sends shivers down your spine. I was ready. The game had begun. I smiled at Sarah when she next came around, acting the part of the contrite, lonely little girl. "I'm sorry," I yelled, I mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "I just miss them so much." She bought it, hook, line, and sinker. She started coming around more often, bringing not just pizza, but gossip. Juicy details about their extravagant spending, their newfound friends, their complete and utter detachment from my existence. I listened intently, nodding sympathetically, all the while recording our conversations on the old phone I'd bought with the pawnshop money. I hid it in my backpack, the microphone subtly pointed in her direction. Each word she spoke was a nail in their coffin, a piece of evidence I would later use to dismantle their carefully constructed lives. The guilt was eating her alive, and she was desperate to confess, to unburden herself of the secret she was carrying. I let her talk, guiding the conversation, extracting every last morsel of information. I learned about their mounting debts, the risky investments they'd made, the shady deals they were involved in. It was a tangled web of lies and deceit, and I was slowly but surely unraveling it. There were close calls, moments when I thought my plan would be exposed. Once, Sarah almost found the hidden phone while rummaging through my backpack. I managed to distract her with a sob story about missing my parents, but her suspicion lingered. I knew I had to be more careful. I started using a voice recorder app on my laptop, hiding it behind a stack of books during our conversations. It was less reliable, but also less risky. Another time, a social worker came to the house, responding to a concerned call from one of my teachers. I played the part of the happy, well-adjusted child, assuring her that everything was fine, that my parents were just on a short trip and would be back soon. I even showed her the fridge, which I had stocked with cheap groceries I'd bought with the pawnshop money. She seemed satisfied, but I knew she would be back. I had to accelerate my plan. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I spent hours poring over legal documents, highlighting key passages, crafting my strategy. I learned about the legal definition of abandonment, the criteria for proving parental negligence, the process for obtaining emancipation. I discovered that in my state, an 11-year-old could petition the court for emancipation under certain circumstances, including parental abandonment and the ability to demonstrate self-sufficiency. It was a long shot, but it was my only hope. I started gathering evidence, compiling a meticulous record of their neglect. The bank statements showing their lavish spending, the credit card bills detailing their extravagant vacations, the phone records proving their lack of contact, Sarah's recorded confessions, the disconnection notice from the electricity company, the notes from my teachers documenting my declining grades and deteriorating health. Each piece of evidence was carefully catalogued and organized, ready to be presented to the court. I even managed to get a copy of their life insurance policy. A grim detail, but potentially useful. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed an ally, someone who could navigate the legal system, someone who would believe me. I remembered a lawyer I had met at the library, a kind woman who had helped me find information about parental rights. I decided to reach out to her, to tell her my story, to beg for her help. I found her card in my pocket, and prayed she was the right person. I called her office, my hand shaking as I dialed the number. Her assistant answered, and I asked to speak to her. "It's an emergency," I said, my voice trembling. "It's about parental abandonment." I waited, my heart pounding, and she answered. I told her everything, omitting nothing. The abandonment, the neglect, the betrayal, the carefully documented evidence. She listened patiently, without interrupting, her voice calm and reassuring. When I was finished, she said, "Come to my office tomorrow morning. Bring all your evidence. We're going to get you out of this." The wave of relief that washed over me was so intense, it almost knocked me off my feet. Finally, someone believed me. Finally, someone was going to help. That night, I barely slept. I went over the plan in my head, visualizing every step, anticipating every obstacle. I packed my backpack with the evidence, the recordings, the documents, the flashlight, the knife. I was ready. I was scared, but I was also determined. I was going to fight for my life, for my future. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was willing to do whatever it took. I knew the risks of selling the phone, but it paid off. I even found a way to check the mail before it got to the house. I needed to pay attention to every detail. The next morning, I left the house before dawn, walking the long miles to the lawyer's office. The sun was just beginning to rise as I arrived, casting long shadows across the empty streets. I took a deep breath, steeled my resolve, and walked through the door. The game was about to change, and it was about to change in my favor. I had recorded it all, every word, every lie, every act of betrayal. And now, it was time to play the tape. The lawyer, Ms. Evans, was everything I had hoped for and more. Her office was small, but warm and inviting, filled with overflowing bookshelves and the comforting aroma of old paper and lemon polish. She greeted me with a kind smile and a firm handshake, her eyes radiating intelligence and compassion. As I laid out my evidence on her desk, she listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, her brow furrowed in concentration. When I played the recordings of Sarah's confessions, her expression hardened. "This is more than enough," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "We can file for emancipation immediately. We can also pursue charges of parental negligence and endangerment. What they did is unconscionable." I felt a surge of vindication, a wave of hope washing over me. Finally, someone was acknowledging the injustice I had suffered, someone was willing to fight for me. Ms. Evans explained the legal process, outlining the steps we would need to take, the documents we would need to file, the hearings we would need to attend. She warned me that it wouldn't be easy, that my parents would likely fight back, that the legal battle could be long and drawn out. But she also assured me that she would be there every step of the way, that she would do everything in her power to protect me and secure my future. The first step was to file a petition for emancipation with the court. Ms. Evans drafted the document, meticulously outlining the grounds for my request, citing the evidence of my parents' abandonment and neglect. We attached all the supporting documents, the bank statements, the credit card bills, the phone records, Sarah's recorded confessions, the disconnection notice, the teacher's notes. It was a powerful and compelling case, a damning indictment of my parents' behavior. We also filed a motion for temporary custody, requesting that I be placed in the care of a trusted adult pending the outcome of the emancipation proceedings. Ms. Evans suggested a family friend, Mrs. Davis, a kind and supportive neighbor who had always been there for me. I agreed. Mrs. Davis was a good woman, someone I could trust, someone who would provide me with a safe and stable home. News of the lawsuit hit them like a tidal wave. Sarah, riddled with guilt and fear, called me, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" she cried. "They're furious. They're going to come back and," I cut her off. "Tell them I'm not afraid," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "Tell them I'm ready for them. And tell them I have more evidence than they think." I hung up the phone, severing the last remaining thread of loyalty. Let them come. I was ready. The trap was set. The bait was laid. All that was left was to wait. Their return was swift and brutal. They arrived in a fury, bursting into the house, their faces contorted with rage. "How dare you?" my mother screamed, her voice shrill and venomous. "How dare you do this to us?" My father stood behind her, his eyes narrowed, his fists clenched. "You ungrateful little brat," he snarled. "We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us?" I stood my ground, unflinching, my eyes fixed on theirs. "You gave me nothing," I said, my voice calm and steady. "You abandoned me. You neglected me. You left me to starve." "That's not true," my mother shrieked. "We were just on a trip. We were coming back." "A trip?" I scoffed. "A trip that lasted for months? A trip where you spent thousands of dollars on yourselves while I was living in squalor?" I gestured around the house, at the peeling paint, the broken windows, the rotting food. "This is what you call giving me everything?" They were caught. They knew it. The lies were crumbling, the carefully constructed facade was collapsing. They tried to backtrack, to rationalize, to minimize their actions. But it was too late. I had the evidence. I had the law on my side. And I had Ms. Evans, waiting in the wings, ready to strike the final blow. The confrontation escalated quickly. My father, his face crimson with anger, lunged toward me, his hand raised. "I'll teach you to disrespect us," he roared. But before he could reach me, Mrs. Davis stepped in front of me, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Don't you dare touch her," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "Get out of my house. You're not welcome here anymore." My parents glared at her, their faces filled with hatred, but they knew they couldn't win. They were outnumbered. They were outmaneuvered. And they were about to face the consequences of their actions. As they stormed out of the house, my mother turned to me, her eyes filled with venom. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll see. We'll make you pay." I just smiled. "I'm already being repaid," I said. "I know what you did." The game wasn't over. It was only just beginning. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior. And I was about to unleash hell. The courtroom was packed. I sat beside Ms. Evans, my small frame dwarfed by the imposing mahogany furniture. My parents were there too, looking disheveled and desperate. Their expensive clothes were rumpled, their faces pale and drawn. They had hired a high-powered attorney, a shark in a suit, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew they were losing. The hearing began. Ms. Evans presented our case, laying out the evidence with surgical precision. She called witnesses, teachers, neighbors, even the social worker who had visited the house. Each testified to my parents' neglect, their abandonment, their blatant disregard for my well-being. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at the judge, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, and I began to speak. I told my story, omitting nothing. The hunger, the loneliness, the fear, the betrayal. I spoke with a clarity and conviction that belied my age. I showed them the bank statements, the credit card bills, the phone records. I played the recordings of Sarah's confessions, her voice filled with guilt and remorse. The room was silent, the only sound my voice echoing through the chamber. The climax came when Ms. Evans introduced a new piece of evidence, something I had been saving for the perfect moment. The life insurance policy. She asked me to read aloud the clause that stipulated that in the event of my parents' accidental demise, the entire sum would be transferred to me, their sole heir. A collective gasp filled the courtroom. I saw the color drain from my parents' faces. They knew what I was implying. They knew that I knew. Ms. Evans then presented evidence that my parents had significantly increased their life insurance policy just weeks before their trip, and that they had made several inquiries about accidental death benefits. The implication was clear: they had planned to end their lives and leave me with the money, a twisted and callous act of abandonment. Their lawyer tried to object, to discredit the evidence, but the judge overruled him. The damage was done. The judge ruled in my favor. She granted me emancipation, declaring me a legal adult, free from the control of my parents. She awarded temporary custody to Mrs. Davis, pending a full investigation into my parents' finances and their fitness as parents. She ordered a forensic audit of their accounts, a search of their properties, and a psychological evaluation. They were ruined. Their reputation tarnished. Their assets seized. Their freedom threatened. As they were led out of the courtroom, my mother turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. "You'll never be happy," she spat. "You'll always be alone." I just smiled. "I already am," I said. "But at least I'm free." The fallout was swift and devastating. The media descended upon my parents, hounding them for answers, exposing their lies and their misdeeds. Their friends and acquaintances abandoned them, shunning them from society. Their business ventures collapsed, their investments soured. They lost everything. Their wealth, their status, their freedom, their family. They were left with nothing but the consequences of their actions. Sarah, consumed by guilt and remorse, turned herself in to the authorities, confessing her role in the scheme. She provided further evidence against my parents, sealing their fate. She was sentenced to probation and community service, a small price to pay for her betrayal. I never spoke to her again. I moved in with Mrs. Davis, who welcomed me with open arms. She provided me with a loving and supportive home, a safe haven from the storm. I enrolled in a new school, where I excelled academically. I made new friends, who accepted me for who I was. I started therapy, working through the trauma of my past, learning to trust and to love again. I rebuilt my life, brick by brick, stronger and more resilient than ever before. My parents tried to contact me, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. But I refused to speak to them. They had forfeited their right to be my parents when they abandoned me. They had chosen money over family, selfishness over love. And they would have to live with the consequences of their choice. Years later, I received a letter from my father. He was in prison, serving a long sentence for fraud and endangerment. He wrote of his regret, his remorse, his longing for a second chance. He begged me to forgive him, to visit him, to offer him some measure of solace. I read the letter, my heart unmoved. I had no sympathy for him. He had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. I threw the letter in the trash, severing the last remaining tie. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's a survival mechanism, a way to reclaim your power when it has been stolen from you. It's not about hatred or malice. It's about justice. It's about holding people accountable for their actions. It's about protecting yourself from further harm. They lost everything. I just smiled. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.